So sometimes the children that God puts in our path are those who've had a difficult time in life. Join us today as we start to discuss this important topic of kids and trauma. Well, class is about to start. The kids are rolling in. Oh, there he is. You're so glad he came back. He had a rough time last week. But you know he's been through a lot of trauma in his young life, more than any child should. Thankfully, things are more stable now. But still, sometimes his smile just melts your heart, and other times his behavior, well, it breaks it. It all feels kind of confusing. Is there anything you can do to help? Trauma, a response to a distressing event or events that overwhelms an individual's ability to cope. While the events that cause trauma may be temporary, the effects last much longer. The more exposure to trauma a child has, the more of an impact it can have on their ability to cope and even on their brain. Let's take a look. Welcome to the world's simplest neuroscience lesson. Here's the brain. Around this area we have our thinking part. Around this area we have our survival part. When children encounter repeated traumatic events, their brains spend more time building strong neural pathways to the survival part, and less time building neural pathways to the thinking part. So what this means is their survival instinct is always on guard and ready to spring into action, which means it takes much less stress for a child who has been traumatized to go into survival mode. That's fight, flight, or freeze. And while this may make sense to a child's traumatized brain, this can be confusing for the others around them. In fact, it can be easy to focus on a child's difficult behavior and assume that he is spoiled or rude or just plain bad. But if we stop and look past the behavior, we'll see that often these children are actually hurting inside, and that their behavior may be the only way they know how to cope when they feel overwhelmed or scared. That kind of changes our perspective, doesn't it? So what can we do to help these precious children that God has brought into our lives? Well, the first thing we can do is understand that a child who's been through trauma experiences the world differently. They may have a hard time trusting others or have difficulty regulating their emotions and coping with stress. So if we see a child is struggling, sometimes the best thing that we can do is to change our expectations and redefine the win. This means when we're leading children's church and we see that a child is beginning to have a hard time, instead of expecting them to dive deep into the curriculum, change the goal instead. Understand that sometimes the win is just helping that child feel safe and feel seen in that moment. Because truthfully, there are times when our role is to teach Bible stories and practice memory verses. But there are other times when the most important thing we can do is just plant the seeds of love into a child. We can do this by remembering that calm starts with you. If a child is beginning to escalate, approach them with empathy. Use a calm, warm tone of voice and open body language. This communicates caring and safety. Ask the child how he's feeling and really listen to understand. Acknowledge his feelings and don't try to point out why he's wrong. If needed, take the child to a quieter part of the room. Allowing the child to have some space in a calmer environment reduces sensory overload and may help him regulate his emotions more quickly. You can give a controlled choice like, would you like to rejoin the game or would you like to chill out here for a few minutes? Sometimes children who are overwhelmed won't respond at all. And if that happens, it's okay. As long as the child is calm and safe, give him space. Tell him that you'll be nearby and he can rejoin the group whenever he's ready. And then when he does, give him a warm smile. You want to focus on his positive choice, not the difficulties that came before. Now, if calming the child doesn't work and they continue to escalate, it's okay to page for help. It's always better to page before a child loses control than to wait until afterwards. When you talk to the parent or guardian, use that same warm tone of voice and open body language. It's important that communication with families be honest, but it also needs to be compassionate. You want families to feel like you're working together. And the most important thing that you can do to help this child is to let them know that they are loved and accepted as they are. Remind them that Jesus loves them too. Trauma is difficult and sometimes the road is bumpy, but every person deserves love and hope. No matter the circumstance, act in love. So I think we covered a lot of important stuff today, but there's one more thing before you go. Remember in the beginning when we talked about how to help a child who's been through trauma? That sometimes it can be confusing? Well, the good news is there's always one place where you can look for answers. This week, spend some time meditating on John 15:12. And ask yourself, what does that look like in your life? Or what kind of difference could it make in the life of a child who needs to feel that love and hope? So the next time you see a child who can melt your heart or break it, remember the most important thing that we can give him is love. Thanks for joining us.